Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank everybody for being here, joining us at the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunities hearing today entitled A Review of the Interagency Transition Assistance Program and the Need for Enhanced Outcome Measurements. As we approach Veterans Day this weekend, today's hearing is timely, as today we will discuss the critical period in a service member's career where they go down the path from active duty to civilian. The goals of today's hearing are to discuss the administration of the Transition Assistance Program, also known as TAP, as well as transitioning service members' ability and flexibility to attend TAP in an appropriate time prior to their separation from the military. TAP is critically important for today's service members because if we can get it right at the outset of a service member's transition from active duty, then I believe we can mitigate. I'm sorry, I'm having like a allergen reaction here, and so I may be calling on somebody to help me. I'll try to make it through this. I'm really not just choked up. I do care a lot about the TAP program, but I'm not getting carried away. We are prone to theatrics from time to time, but not that good. So bear with me, I apologize. The TAP is critically important for today's service members. We've got to get it right. If we do, we mitigate many issues that have plagued and continue to plague previous generations of American veterans. The information on financial management, job search skills, and veterans benefits are much improved from what was being provided to service members under previous versions of TAP, which many referred to as, quote, death by PowerPoint. And while TAP structure and curriculum have been greatly improved over the years, we can and should do more to prioritize the successful transition of our servicemen and women into their civilian lives. Before I turn this over to my ranking member, I want to briefly make a few points. The GAO report that is being released today provides great information on how the Department of Defense is tracking the participation rate of service members attending the TAP program. DOD's publicly released data for FY16 shows that 94% of National Guard and Reserve members completed pre-separation counseling and TAP. However, the real figures reported by GAO found that DOD was missing data for some of the TAP-eligible National Guardsmen and Reservists, and that the actual percentage could be as low as 47%. And GAO also found that while DOD talked about a 97% attendance by active duty members, that number did not account for all TAP-eligible service members, and therefore the percentage could be much lower. While DOD may say that that's just because forms were lost, that doesn't mean that service members didn't actually attend the training. It's important to make sure we track every service member. And in the year of 2017, saying that we lost data is unacceptable. I want to thank GAO for uncovering this problem, and I do trust that DOD will work to ensure all service members are being tracked, regardless of whether or not they're active or reserve component. I also want to echo the comments from the past three chairmen of this subcommittee by saying that I believe DOD is missing the mark by not placing more emphasis on higher education and other two-day tracks that are a part of TAP. Several years ago, Congress made it mandatory for DOD to allow the participation in this training for those service members who wish to do so. I'll be honest that in light of this requirement, I'm more puzzled as to why DOD would reject a recommendation from GAO that they do a better job of tracking this participation. Why would the department reject an effort to track the compliance with the law? These tracks are critically important because under the right circumstances, the post-9/11 GI Bill can provide upwards of $300,000 in benefits to our veteran. And with thousands of schools and training programs clamoring for student veterans, we must do everything we can to make sure that our service members are provided with all the information and tools they need to make an informed choice on the right school and how to use their educational benefits. Another issue that I hope to hear more about today is how the Department of Veterans Affairs, Labor, and Defense are measuring and tracking performance and the long-term outcomes of TAP. That is it working? Do we know it's working? How do we know it's working? Where's the data? I've always been a proponent of the need to measure outcomes for any program. Without it, measurable outcomes, it's impossible to know for certain if the curriculum is working, if the service members are receiving the adequate resources and training for transition to active duty. I want to take a moment to commend DoD, VA, and DOL for working together to transform TAP over the past 2 years. I know it's a challenge to get this right, and I think a lot of strides have been made. The GAO report stated while unemployment rates for veterans continue to remain low, over half of post-9/11 veterans will face a period of unemployment upon transition. It's our job to continue to work together and improve the process and facilitate a smooth transition to address the unemployment gap. I look forward to hearing from our panelists. I appreciate all of you guys for being here today. I now yield the ranking member, Mr. O'Rourke, for any opening remarks he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we all on this committee agree that it's critically important that we get this transition between life in service to country in our armed forces and life as a civilian, as a veteran, right, and that we don't have it right today. When we look at access to health care, to housing, the ability to integrate in the workforce or in higher education, we are still falling far short of the mark. Yesterday, we were able to celebrate passage of a bill that improves access to mental health care for veterans who have an other than honorable discharge, improving their likelihood of successfully transitioning and, frankly, of living, since they have twice as high a suicide rate as veterans who have a higher level of discharge. I want to make sure that we are paying close and careful attention to the TAP program, that we understand, as the chairman has said, what it is that we are investing in it and how we can measure its performance, the outcomes, the help that it should be delivering to those service members who are transitioning into civilian life. Perhaps the two most important, powerful hearings that I've been in, one, I know Dr. Winstrup was in with us because I think it was our first term in Congress and on this committee, was with family members who had lost a son or daughter to suicide. And they gave us incredibly powerful, helpful testimony in how we could improve the transition process from active duty into civilian life, where we had failed before and how we could improve upon it. I especially think of the Summers family, Howard and Jean, parents of Daniel Summers, who took his life, who have every single day since Daniel's passing been working with me and my colleagues and the administration, whether it was President Obama or President Trump, to improve this period of transition, and have even offered a specific policy idea in a reverse boot camp that I think merits more study and discussion and perhaps moving forward on. The other was one that we had this year with a panel that was talking about some of the consequences of untreated post-traumatic stress disorder. And I remember Sebastian Younger, who Dr. Winstrup really turned me on to and gave me a copy of his book, talking about the crisis that transitioning service members face as they try to integrate into civilian life, far too often unsuccessfully, unable to get to work, to transition into academic life, to transition into family life, and the very real mortal toll that is taking on our population of veterans in this country as long as we do not figure this out and have a more effective, seamless transition. So I'm very interested in the answers to the questions that the chairman raised and that I'm sure other members of this committee are going to raise. I'm very much looking forward to the testimony from GAO, my favorite agency in government, which keeps us all accountable, Department of Defense, Department of Labor, Veterans Affairs, and the different representatives of the service branches. So grateful to you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this hearing together. Very much looking forward to the answers we're going to get today.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And now let's welcome our first panel to the witness table. Joining us today, Ms. Cindy Brown Barnes, Director of Education, Workforce and Income Security for the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, Ms. Margarita Devlin, Executive Director of the Benefits Assistance Services at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, General Ivan Denton, Director of the Office of National Programs for the Veterans Employment and Training Service at the U.S. Department of Labor, and Mr. Judd Lyons, Director of the Defense Personnel and Family Support Center for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness at the U.S. Department of Defense. Thanks again for your time and insights. Ms. Brown-Barnes, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here to discuss the report we are issuing today on the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. Since 2015, hundreds of thousands of service members have left the military and transitioned into civilian life, with many more to follow. To help them, the Vow to Hire Heroes Act of 2011 mandates that DoD require all eligible separating service members participate in TAP to get the support they need in landing a job, going back to school, starting their own business, or retiring. Today I will cover 1, how DoD publicly reports its TAP performance goals, 2, how many service members went through TAP, 3, how many were deemed to be career ready, and finally, 4, how well DoD monitors key areas of program implementation. In summary, we found that DoD needs to improve performance reporting and monitoring of TAP requirements. The figure shown on the monitor is a comparison of DoD's public and internal reports. We found that DoD's public reporting may have misstated TAP performance because DoD did not disclose the data were missing for 48% of National Guard and Reserves and 12% of active duty service members in fiscal year 2016. When DoD publicly reported that it had exceeded its performance goals, it excluded these individuals even though they were eligible for TAP. However, DoD's internal reports tell a different story. The top 2 blue bars show that publicly, DoD reported that over 90% of Guard and Reserves attended TAP's required courses, were deemed career ready, or were referred to partner agencies. Had all eligible Guard and Reserves been included in the calculation, their percentage could have been as low as about 46% instead of 94%. This is shown in the 2 beige or lighter colored bars immediately below, in which case DoD would not have met its performance goals. Turning to the 3rd and 4th blue bars, DoD's public reports show that a higher percentage of active duty service members met the agency's performance goals, but the percentage is lower according to DoD's internal reports, again, because the calculations were not based on the entire TAP eligible population. We recommended that DoD's public reports either be based on all TAP eligible service members or else clarify the extent of the missing data. DoD agreed to include the disclosures for the missing data in all of its public reports for fiscal year 2018 and beyond. With regard to participation, DoD met its goal. 85% of active duty service members took required TAP courses, while 3% did not. We do not know about the remaining 12% due to missing data. As far as the additional 2-day classes, we found that fewer than 15% of service members participated and that assessing higher education was the most frequently taken class. DoD also met its 85% goal for the proportion of service members who were deemed career ready, and if they did not, they were referred to partner agencies for additional support services as required. In terms of when TAP should be taken, the law requires service members to begin the process at least 90 days before they leave the military. While nearly 3/4 started TAP on time, TAP staff told us that those who did not may find it difficult to complete the program or take advantage of additional transition resources. Similarly, service members are required to complete TAP no later than 90 days before leaving the military, but over 53% of them did not finish TAP on time. In terms of monitoring, we found that DoD does not currently monitor compliance with 3 requirements: timeliness of TAP participation, whether service members are able to take additional two-day classes if they want, and whether they take the online version of TAP under appropriate circumstances. We recommended monitoring and reporting for all three areas, and that the report should be shared with unit commanders to ensure compliance. DOD generally agreed with our recommendations, except for tracking access to the two-day classes. DOD said these classes are part of attaining career readiness standards, a measure which is already being tracked. We continue to believe that DOD needs to separately track access to the additional classes and not just attendance to ensure compliance with the relevant law. Thank you. I would be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Ms. Devlin, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Veterans Affairs contribution to the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. With Veterans Day rapidly approaching, this is an opportune time for this hearing to take stock of our efforts to help our transitioning service members and their families, and how VA can continue to improve these services. As a result of the VOW Act passed by Congress in 2011, TAP was redesigned as a cohesive, modular, outcomes-based program that standardized services to better prepare service members to achieve their post-military career goals. The VOW Act also mandated participation in TAP with a few limited exceptions. Outcomes from the increased focus and emphasis on education and career development by both VA and DOL content can be seen reflected in the dramatic reduction in veteran unemployment, which has steadily decreased to a low of 2.7% in October 2017. VA's portion of TAP is delivered at over 300 military installations worldwide through the support of approximately 300 trained VA benefit advisors, and is also available online via DoD's Joint Knowledge online portal. VA is collaborating with DoD to align TAP offerings within the military life cycle framework, which embeds transition planning and preparation throughout the service member's military career. For example, as part of a session in onboarding, service members are required to establish a self-service logon and create an e-benefits account, which gives them and their family members self-service capabilities for VA and military benefits. VA benefit advisors deliver the mandatory Benefits 1 and 2 courses, which provide education on VA benefits such as healthcare, education, vocational rehabilitation and employment, disability compensation, life insurance, home loans. They also assist with capstone events, provide military life cycle briefings, and provide individual assistance to transitioning service members upon their request. In fiscal year 2017, approximately 95% of our benefits advisors were either veterans themselves or were spouses of veterans or service members. In fiscal year 2017 through August, VA provided more than 63,000 events to more than 500,000 transitioning service members and their families. VA regularly updates the TAP curriculum to ensure that it aligns with current laws on eligibility, entitlement, and VA benefits and services. VA also designed a new curriculum designed specifically for members of the National Guard and Reserve, as they have unique needs due to their missions and mobilizations, and eligibility for VA programs is often more complex to adjudicate. VA consistently receives high evaluations from service members who attend Benefits 1 and 2 briefings. We average satisfaction rates of 96% on information learned, 96% also on effectiveness of the facilitators, and 94% on confidence gained from the material. Despite high satisfaction rates, anecdotal information from stakeholders and veterans suggests that a more holistic view, including the psychosocial aspects of the transition to the civilian life, would give VA's TAP program more real-life relevance and would increase the quality of the overall experience. To address this, VA is currently redesigning our TAP curriculum into a more interactive course that addresses the overall transition journey. VA is leveraging instructional design based on adult learning principles to focus on transition decisions and actions that transitioning service members need to consider with respect to their available VA services and benefits. VA also plans to include classroom time for facilitated enrollment and submission of applications for healthcare and other benefits. VA is scheduled to pilot the new curriculum in January of 2008, with worldwide deployment planned for later this spring of 2018. To further understand the needs of transitioning service members, VA is working with interagency partners to collect feedback on post-separation outcomes. In 2017, VA awarded a contract to develop a post-separation survey protocol, which will be submitted to the Office of Management and Budget for review in 2018. VA is also collaborating with our VSO partners, veteran peer groups, and other thought leaders to obtain outside input based on the feedback they hear from transitioning service members. VA is strongly committed to working with DoD and interagency partners to improve TAP by strengthening the curriculum, fully integrating TAP objectives into the military life cycle, and analyzing post-transition survey data. Through these efforts, VA is poised to have greater access to all those in uniform, both active duty and National Guard and Reserve, and dramatically reduce the stress of transition. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Devlin. General Denton, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing so that the Department of Labor can discuss how we're working with both DoD and VA to improve TAP. As the Director of the Office of National Programs in the Veterans and Employment Training Service, my office is responsible for managing the employment workshop and the career technical training track, which we now commonly refer to as CTTT. Prior to discussing TAP employment-related improvements, I'd like to highlight 3 relevant points to this testimony. First, the American economy is improving. As of October, veteran unemployment rate is down to 2.7. Additionally, unemployment compensation claims and participant numbers have dropped to a third of what they were 5 years ago. While there are still approximately 280,000 veterans without jobs that are unemployed, there are 6.1 million job openings. Transitioning service members and veterans can help fill these jobs, and employers are eager to hire them. Second, the department proudly served over 1 million veterans, guardsmen, and reservists last year. DOL provides funds to the states to operate over 2,400 American job centers, which provided employment, training, and support services to over 13 million Americans last year. Over 850,000 of those Americans were veterans, guardsmen, or reservists. Additionally, the department, of course, provided the employment workshop to over 180,000 last year, which includes, of course, the Guard and Reserve. Third, Secretary Costa recently stated 4 employment goals to assist our veterans, which include creating clear career pathways. Second, eliminating barriers to employment. Third, enabling and promoting apprenticeship opportunities that lead to meaningful careers, as also emphasized in the President's executive order, which is titled Expanding Apprenticeships in America. And then finally, increasing the portability of licenses and credentials for both those transitioning to include spouses. As it relates to employment improvements that align with the TAP GAO report, I'd like to highlight 4 goals. First, the department is working with the interagency partners to improve TAP timeliness rates. We assess, in line with both the law and DoD's policy, that transitioning service members should begin TAP as early as possible. This allows the service member adequate time to participate in one or more of the transition tracks and to include DoD Skill Bridge, which is growing in its popularity. Second, the department continues to improve the employment workshop. While the employment workshop has consistently received high marks from the participants, we recognize the need for continuous improvement. This is why we've been collaborating over the last year with employers, HR professionals, veteran service organizations, and others to refine their curriculum as part of a regular, deliberate TAP curriculum working group review process. Major revisions to the DOLEW include shifting from a job search approach to a career search approach. And second, highlighting the importance of the 3 supplemental career tracks and how each can positively impact long-term wage outcomes. Third, the department will improve the training available to individuals interested in the apprenticeship and technical careers, and will work with our interagency partners to increase the CTTT participation rates. In April 2017, DOL assumed responsibility for what we call CTTT, the Career Technical Training Track, which is one of the 3 tracks. CTTT focuses on apprenticeships and industry-recognized credentials. The department is currently conducting a comprehensive review and will have a revised curriculum out in 2018. Fourth and finally, the department will leverage the Veterans Data Exchange Initiative to improve employment outcomes. In November 2016, the department began a data transfer process from the Defense Manpower Data Center. This initiative allows us to gain a better understanding of characteristics of transitioning service members and proactively reach out to them via email to connect them with employment and training resources. We're also partnering with our Chief Evaluation Office within DOL to do this. In conclusion, our long-term TAP strategic goal is for the nation as a whole to recognize military service as a path to a high-quality civilian career. The future of our country's all-volunteer force depends upon this recognition, and the department is proud to support this national effort and looks forward to working with the subcommittee. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for allowing me to be here today and look forward to questions.
Thank you, General Denton. Finally, Mr. Lyons, you're recognized also for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon. As Director of the Defense Personnel and Family Support Center, I am responsible for policy and program oversight of the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. In that capacity, I work with a group of professionals who develop effective and clear policy for the department to issue to the military services for their execution. We also believe that the TAP interagency collaboration is effective, responsive, and committed to advancing the ongoing implementation, assessment, and enhancement of TAP. Since 2015, we've improved several areas of TAP, and I'd like to address a few. We've updated the TAP evaluation plan twice with both enhancements approved by the Office of Management and Budget, and we've annually updated our curriculum. To improve accountability, we've charged the military departments to have their service inspectors general conduct inspections of TAP. Their first report is due in 2018. Last November, the department deployed a new TAP IT enterprise system and electronic form which further streamlined our data collection processes. This system precludes commanders from signing partially completed forms, thus increasing the completeness of service member documentation. Finally, the department has energized our private and public engagements. Our collaboration raises awareness of the value transitioning service members and veterans. Since August 2016, we've completed over 200 public and private engagements. In addition to these actions since 2015, we are committed to continuously improving the program to the benefit of the service member. The department greatly appreciates the importance placed on TAP by Congress and the GAO. We view the recent GAO study on TAP as an opportunity to receive external feedback to further advance this important program. Generally, we concur with GAO's recommendations. We acknowledge that in 2016, our performance measures provided via public reporting did not provide a clear explanation of the extent of missing data. We have since made adjustments to address this and will work even harder with the services to reduce the extent of missing data, particularly for our reserve component service members. The department agrees with GAO's recommendation to monitor and report timeliness of TAP participation, and we will work with the services to identify and implement the best solutions to improve in this area. We appreciate GAO's recommendation that DoD monitor and report which service members request attendance to supplementary two-day tracks and are able to attend the training. We will continue to actively promote and encourage participation in these tracks and research potential barriers to service members accessing them. The department agrees with GAO's recommendation that DoD needs to monitor and report which service members participated in TAP in a classroom setting or online. Based on availability of resources, we anticipate having the ability to accomplish this task, and we appreciate GAO's recommendation highlighting the need for commanders to access additional data on TAP. The services currently have procedures in place to make this new suggested information available to commanders. We will strengthen our efforts working with the services so that commanders will have access to this information. Finally, the department supports GAO's recommendation to minimize subjectivity involved with some of the career readiness standards, such as the quality of a resume. We will work with the services and Department of Labor to identify ways to mitigate such subjectivity by the end of fiscal year 2018. Again, let me thank GAO for their comprehensive and insightful report and their recommendations to further advance TAP for the nation. The Department recognizes that preparing service members throughout their military life cycle to be career-ready upon transition is essential to the sustainment of the all-volunteer force. We cannot do this alone. We need the continued strong collaboration with our interagency partners, the support and hard work of our military services, especially at the installation level, and continued engagement with external stakeholders. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I thank you, the ranking member, and the members of this subcommittee for your outstanding and continuing support of the men and women who proudly wear the uniform in defense of our great nation. As we pause to celebrate Veterans Day this weekend, let us never forget to all honor Americans who served in the armed forces both in times of war and peace, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons. I'll now yield myself 5 minutes for questions. I don't imagine that there's anybody on the panel or here on the dais that would not think it be a good idea to help our service members transition from active duty to civilian life in the smoothest, most effective manner. Could I get a head nod that we all agree that's a good thing? So now what we have to do is make sure our actions line up with our agreement that this is a good endeavor. And then we have to have data to know whether or not what we've decided as a program to do that is actually working or not. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of words from here and from you. And so what are we doing to determine whether or not the programs that are offered are the right programs, that the folks that go through the programs, the tracks, are actually benefiting, and that long-term they're getting better and quicker employment rates and engaging in education and training opportunities? And I'd like everybody to answer that, but I'll start with you, Ms. Devlin.
Thank you for the question. We do measure outcomes. We can't always attribute all of the outcomes directly to participation in the Transition Assistance Program, but I think the biggest effort that we're undertaking, which will give us, I think, what you're looking for, is that post-transition survey. Because what I hear sometimes is when you're going through the Transition Assistance Program, you don't know what you don't know yet until you actually become a civilian and start that actual transition on the other side. Getting this survey data from veterans who have recently transitioned at the 6-month, 12-month, and 18-month mark will give us data that is from their voices themselves about how the program influenced their ability to successfully transition and what they're going through in their life at those stages and post-transition.
So you said you have some outcome data. What's the outcome data that you have today that we can link back to these programs and whether or not they're successful?
Again, we can't always attribute these outcomes directly to participation in TAP, but through the Senior Steering Group and Executive Committee, we track outcomes such as graduation rates, unemployment rates.
But we don't, that could have little, a lot, or nothing to do with these programs.
Correct.
That we spend, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's frustrating to me because all too often we don't have this sort of data. It's just activity. You report activity. I heard a lot of activity. We're doing this, we're doing that. And then we have time frames, and sometimes they're followed. We have requirements for reporting. Sometimes it's followed. Sometimes people don't care to follow that, even though that's part of the law. But what we need more than anything is, are these programs working? So we can tell the taxpayers your investment is actually supporting our veterans or not. And we can look the veterans in the eyes and say, this is a meaningful program for you. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned this post-transition survey. Is that in the works? Are we going to implement that? Is that something that you guys are planning on implementing, and when are you going to implement it?
Yes, we are. We are in the drafting process for the survey questions with our contractor. The interagency group is working on this together, although VA awarded the contract for the development. And we should be sending it to, we will definitely be implementing in 2018. And as soon as the draft is ready for submission to OMB, we'll submit it for that review process so that we can start fielding the survey.
Sure. How long has this program been going in existence, I should say?
It is a brand new effort.
No, I mean this program, the TAP program as administered by the VA, your component of it.
The TAP program, in its current state, it was post-VOW Act. The VA started administering the program in its current state in 2013.
Okay. Okay, at least 4 years without knowing whether or not it's working. What about you, Mr. General Denton? Where are your outcome measures, and how do you know your part of the program's working?
First of all, that's a great question. Having just transitioned last year myself, I know you don't want to hear anecdotally, I think it works.
Oh, that's valuable.
But I will tell you, actually, Judd and I went through TAP together last year, and it was very helpful. And I will tell you, whether you're a sergeant or whether you're a general, that challenging question of what are you going to do for your second career is not an easy one. So I will tell you that my personal passion for this program has to do with I left last December and was fortunate enough to get a job with Labor. But to answer your first question, we're blessed at the Department of Labor to have an office called the Chief Evaluation Office, and it's led by a brilliant doctor who is an expert on long-term impact studies, which when I was in DOD, I didn't even know what that word meant. But I will tell you that we're about to do a contract to do a 36-month study on the long-term impacts, and I can get you the exact language of that, but we think it's going to be pretty landmark in nature, and that we're going to be able to prove to you and the taxpayers that it's in the interest of TSMs and the American taxpayer for this program to continue.
My time's expired. I'll have more questions and follow up to your comments. I appreciate that. And so, Mr. Ranking Member, I'm turn it over to you for 5 minutes.
Great. Mr. Lyons, what's the total cost of TAP annually?
Congressman, for FY16, the department executed approximately $117 million for TAP. That includes our headquarters and the services across the spectrum. We're collating the FY17 data from the comptroller from OSD, so I'd like to take that for the record and come back to you with that. That data is not available yet, but for FY16, it was about $117 million.
So for the last year, we have data. It's 100 and you said 1,617, all in.
That includes the elements of the program execution along with the civilian pay associated with administering and executing the program.
And to the chairman's line of questioning, can you give me a succinct answer on how we can get better measurable outcomes? Not so much who attended class and when they attended it and whether they attended it online or in person, although those could be important measures, but what the value of that attendance was. But for participating in the TAP program, they would not have achieved X, Y, or Z.
Thank you, Congressman. I would offer that our output measures for the Department of Defense center around vow compliance, career readiness standard attainment, but we are constantly looking at data points that help us improve the program. So we have a series of assessments, participant assessments, that a service member going through TAP takes, and that gives us some valuable feedback in terms of customer satisfaction and the impact that TAP had on the transitioning service member. So for example, in FY17, in quarter 3, the last quarter we have data for, 91% of our participants that went through TAP said that they gained valuable information and skills to plan their transition. An additional 91% said that the training they received in TAP enhanced their confidence in their transition planning, and 91% said that they would use what they know.
Sorry,
Yes, sir.
sorry to interrupt you. Are those boxes you can check, or are those things that people took the time to write out?
So it's a combination. The participant assessment is both selections to questions as well as free data input.
Gotcha. Here's what I'm trying to get at. It's not clear to me how seriously we take TAP. All of us included. We have the oversight responsibility. You all have responsibility for execution. You're supposed to complete that program before you reach the 90-day point, before you're 90 days away from separation. 53% of those participating are doing it with less than 90 days. We have reports in this GAO study that officers are asking that their the members of their unit not have to go to class and be able to do this online. We hear anecdotally from separating service members and veterans that it was just something they had to go through, get out of the way. They want to get on with their civilian life or whatever they're doing next. I don't know that we have a compelling articulation of the value of TAP. What we can tell that separating service member that they're going to find in this that's going to help them in their lives beyond the fact that they have to do this or they're supposed to do this. Same for the officer, same for the member of Congress, same for the taxpayer who fronts the $117 million annually. Without that measure, this is not going to get better. And I agree with the chairman on this. The fact that you all couldn't report on a majority or a near majority of Guard and Reserve service members because it was recorded in paper and you didn't transition adequately to digital, I mean, that just to me sounds like it's not something that we take very seriously. So maybe I'm able to identify some of the symptoms of the problems. I'd really like to work together with you and with the chairman on how we get some defined, measurable outcomes that demonstrate the value of this, because I think all of us get the concept. We want it to work. It's not clear that it is, or that we're getting a return for the investment, or that this is valuable for the participating service member. And one question that I have, perhaps for the next panel, and I would love either in this panel or offline with Dr. Wenstrup and Mr. Banks, I'd love to know if there's some way to have the leaders of those units, the officers, have some level of accountability through separation and post-separation. I know anecdotally there are officers who come up to me and say, hey, a guy who was in my unit, veteran now, one of your constituents, Beto, can't get a mental health care appointment, and it really bothers me, and I feel accountable and responsible for that. I want you to do something about it. Is there some way to give those commanders more control or power or accountability or responsibility to help these service members see through this transition in a more effective way? Anyhow, more questions that I think are going to take a while to answer, but appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. A great line of questions. Now I want to recognize our colleague, Mr. Banks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brown-Barnes, during GAO's assessment of TAP, did it seem as if the service members were being encouraged and allowed to attend the additional optional tracks if they wanted to?
They were, from the people that we talked to, they were allowed to, in terms of being encouraged. Sometimes the timing didn't allow for them to do it, but usually they had some opportunities to do that.
So anecdotally, you believe that they were
Yes.
encouraged to if there was time to do so?
If there was time to do so. I mean, we had also heard different things about sometimes they weren't, or mission type activities took priority. So we did hear some of that as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lyons and General Denton, how are the departments tracking whether a service member who doesn't meet the career readiness standards for employment, how do we know that they're receiving that, quote, warm handover? And is this warm handover effective and truly what the service member needs to be career ready? Mr. Lyons?
Congressman, thank you. So in 2016, the department issued 2 memorandums, one that specifically focused in on an at-risk population of veterans for homelessness. And we issued guidance to the services to ensure that commanders understand their responsibility to ensure that warm handover happens to the appropriate agency. It could be Veterans Affairs, it could be Department of Labor, it could be both in the case of homelessness. We did the same thing for those that that separate for an other than honorable discharge, recognizing that that population could also be at risk and the need to have a warm handover. So we continue to engage with our interagency partners to provide input with the deployment of our electronic form this last year. We're actually getting service member level data on when they opt in to receive follow-on services from a partner agency. And we provide that data then to Department of Labor or Veterans Affairs so that we can more accurately track and deliver those services. So I defer to my colleagues for further on that.
Colonel?
That's a great question. Thanks, Judd. The employment warm handoff process is working. We have a process in place. We don't nationally track it and monitor it. In the last 6 months, the Army has asked us to do that with them. So we think with VDEI and the E-form, we eventually may be able to look at that macro number on employment and be able to see if we're making the mark. So we're definitely looking forward to working with DOD on that, especially since the Army has reached out and said, we'd like your help on this.
I'm not sure why I called you a colonel, but I apologize, General, for that. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. And now I want to recognize Mr. Takano for 5 minutes.
Hi, Ms. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I was a high school teacher for over 2 decades and a community college trustee for about the same amount of time. And I saw many students struggle with their transition into post-secondary education because they needed remedial education, developmental education. And while I know this wasn't the focus of this report, I'm curious to know if we have any data on service members' educational background before they entered military service.
Yeah, that was outside of what we did for this review. We could submit that for the record, but I don't have any.
I don't know if you collect that data. I mean, it's always, I've always wondered whether or not we knew about our service members' educational background, because that has a lot to do with whether or not they're going to be able to utilize their post-9/11 GI Bill benefits, right? I mean, we recruit them on the basis of these benefits, but I believe the military should, because we do recruit them on that basis, has some responsibility in making sure that these benefits are not hollow. And they'll hollow if we don't do anything to help these service members attain the ability to attend higher education during the time in the military. So you don't, I would be curious to see that data, and but you really can't tell me much about that data now.
No, we didn't
I'll have more
collect
questions once you do submit it.
Okay.
Mr. Secretary, the GAO study found very low rates of attendance for the supplemental TAP courses on accessing higher education, career and technical training, and entrepreneurship. Well, obviously, not every one of these supplemental classes will be applicable to service members. Chances are one of them will be relevant to whatever post-service path a service member has planned. And as these classes have a direct impact on how veterans use their benefits, such as the GI Bill, and have the potential to help service members take their core TAP program and turn it into actual job opportunities after separation, the low participation rate seems to indicate to me missed opportunities to help service members successfully transition. So how has OSD thought about, well, I want to know, has OSD thought about mandating that service members attend at least one of these currently supplemental programs?
Thank you, Congressman. We have approached, with our revamped TAP enterprise, an adoption of career readiness standards. How career ready is the transitioning service member to transition to a civilian career? And we've adopted, as part of that, an engagement earlier in their military life cycle on topics such as this, higher education being one. So we deployed a higher education prep module that is a virtual module that actually explores a transitioning service member earlier in their career. What are their goals? What are the education requirements to help them achieve those goals? And what resources are available to them, such as tuition assistance? So we are interested in the aspirations of the service member and providing resources to them. With respect to the additional tracks, one of the reasons we developed those additional 2-day tracks and designed them to be delivered both in a brick and mortar classroom environment and online was to make them available to whatever service member has that particular career goal in mind. And we think we've been successful in that. We found that service members that attend a brick-and-mortar classroom may revisit a particular topic online, such as the higher education prep module.
Okay, so, but are you looking at mandating that they take one of those those supplemental courses?
I think, Congressman, that adopting a one-size-fits-all approach of mandating attendance at the two-day track may not apply to a service member that doesn't have that particular goal in mind. So we are going to continue. If they espouse that desire for higher education, we're going to actively and constantly promote attendance at those two-day tracks.
I'm glad that you're all taking an interest in the educational and career goals of the service member. That's really good to hear. But are they assessed? Is there any point, when do you assess them if they are assessed for their, their educational goals? I mean, how appropriately?
So again, back to the military life cycle, we engage with them earlier in their career, beginning at their first duty station and at certain touch points throughout their career, promotions, re-enlistments, and revisit their individual development plan that they've put together.
But are they assessed?
When it comes time to transition, during pre-separation counseling, they will sit down with a TAP counselor who will review their individual development plan and change it into an individual transition plan. At that point, as they sit down and have that conversation, the counselor will encourage and promote the attendance at the appropriate two-day track with the service member.
But my point is that the military does not assess the service member earlier at the point of induction or any earlier point. There's no way for you to help guide and hold accountable that service member for the goals they set without that assessment as a baseline.
Yeah, I think that in a service member's life cycle, things change over the course of their life cycle. So again, our objective is to, in their capstone event prior to actually separating, assess whether they are career ready to transition.
You assess them at the end of when they're ready to leave, but not toward the beginning, and there's no way for you to intervene if that service member is really unprepared to pursue a certain educational path or career path. Anyway, my time is up. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate the conversation, and I think we're headed in the right direction, but I think there's a lot more we can do. And so let me just start with you, Mr. Lyons. Per troop, what is mission complete for the DoD when it comes to the Transition Assistance Program? What do you say, like, we've done our job? What does that look like?
I think, Congressman, first and foremost, I don't think we are ever mission complete. I don't think we can ever rest on, 100% of completion in terms of transition assistance. I think it's an evolving program. The nature of service.
I'm talking about. Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm talking about like per troop. Is it mission complete when you say, look, this troop knows where he's going. She is going to school. They know what they want to major in. They've got it mapped out. That, to me, before they take their uniform off, if they know what they're doing, they're enrolled in school, to me that would be mission complete. That's a success. We've done our job, Because I think in the big picture, the big aerial picture of what it means to join the military, we're going to do a whole lot better if the military is seen as a place where any young American can enter and it's a path to success. And so I agree with Mr. Takano's comment, like, when do we start engaging that troop? From day one, do you say, what do you want? Is military your career? Is that what you have in mind? Do you want to do something afterwards? Because let's face it, you started at 18, you got plenty of time for another career after that, right? So get them thinking in that way. Are we asking those questions early on? Because to me, for VA, and it's good that you're all here because you all have a role to play in this. And to me, success means that before you take that uniform off, you know where you're going. You think of the college graduate that gets their diploma and they already know where they're going to be working in 2 weeks. That's a whole lot better day than one who walks up, gets that degree, and has no idea what lies ahead. And I think we'll recruit better, and the military will be transformed in so many ways. You say, like, that's the path to success in America. If you choose that, you serve your country, and they're going to make sure that you're on a path to success. So to me, we have to engage early, because for the VA, for example, the VA then is strapped with being reactive too often. Because if you think about some of the problems that we face with suicide and depression and stress, listen, when you come out and you don't feel necessary, when you have felt necessary for a long time being in uniform, that's when it spirals downward. So I'm going to propose, and I think you probably all would agree, and I know that my friends here that are both on Armed Services and on this committee, we need to come together on this. I don't think this should just be VA committee driven. I think we need to reach back and go back a little bit further, and I think we can do a whole lot better. But let's define what success really looks like and in this program. And to me, it would be when you leave here, you know exactly where you're going. And that our success in what we do should be based on how many people actually know where they're going and what they're doing and have a plan and leave with confidence. So anyone can engage in that conversation with me, but I hope that's where we're headed, and I think we're at the beginnings of that.
Congressman, thank you. And just real quickly here, you know, I would offer that, again, we are engaging with service members earlier in the process to talk about those issues that you described. So I talked about that individual development plan that begins at their first duty station, where, again, we have a discussion about their goals. What is the training and education requirements? We talk about apprenticeship information, resume prep information, financial preparedness information. This is early on so that, again, our culture changes across the department so that the first time they're thinking about transition is not their last action leaving the service. And so we think that military life cycle culture that we're undergoing through early engagement and at critical points in a service member's careers will help us to get there. But I acknowledge your comments.
I appreciate it. We can keep talking about that. If anyone else cares to.
Sir, we have looked at that hard at Labor. Having gone through the employment workshop last year, I will tell you that we've kind of taken a look at what's our end state. We think it should be meaningful career. That's in line with earlier documents of why TAP was started. We think for a TSM to get that meaningful career, our secretary has talked about the pathways. We really think that higher ed, career technical training, and entrepreneur provides for those three paths. So that's why we're really looking forward to working with our interagency partners toward helping those TSMs get into that path, which now we call it track. Whether we call it a track or a path, that's really what we're talking about. Thank you.
Mr. Correa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up with what Dr. Weinstrup said and Mr. Takano. I'm looking at this data and this information, and again, issues with the supplemental TAP, 15% participation. Those that left the military with less than an honorable discharge, 5% participation. And to me, it kind of signals in my mind that maybe the value given by our men and women in uniform is not that high. If you come back and your participation is 15%, tells me that there's a disconnect between what they really are looking for and what they're really getting. And I think we can mandate these men and women in uniform to do these supplemental, this TAP program, but yet when they come back and use it at such a low rate, it's telling me something about the value. And I guess if I went back and talked to those folks that are leaving the military and asked them, what do you want to do before you leave? And probably most of them say, I just want to get home. And so you try to force feed some of these folks this information. I'm not sure what the value is. I think this is good information, but I'm trying to figure out that this is more of an issue you try to catch up with these folks, not only before they leave, but after they leave. I mean, one of the issues we've been looking at is deported veterans, veterans that are residents that should have become citizens before they left the military. Those are some of the things that I think would really add value. if you said, you guys got to become U.S. citizens before you leave. The other area, of course, is, I hate to bring it up, but, this tragedy in Texas. You have an individual that had serious mental issues. There were indicators there, and there was no follow-up. There was no somewhere it didn't, all the dots were not aligned, were not connected. And, again, you have an evolving program. You have investments, aspirations of service officers. I'm trying to figure out in my mind where we go with this program that could be a tremendous value. But to me, in my mind, I've got to figure, let's go back and ask these men and women in uniform, where is it that we can help you the most? Maybe we come back and talk to them 6 months after a year after the discharge and see how they're doing. How are you doing? Are we having issues at home? Did you get the jobs you were looking for? Were you able to connect with that apprentice program that's paying $60,000 a year to start? Or are you not there yet? I have a lot of questions. Open it up for statements or comments from the panel.
Congressman, thank you. I think that in terms of pulsing the needs of our members, both active component and reserve component, again, I hearken back to our participant assessments where they can give us direct feedback on these issues. And
let me interrupt you. I don't have much time other than a minute and a half, but that was the other point I had, which is having somebody fill out a questionnaire or a form saying, was this good or bad, versus coming back to them in a year and saying, was this good or bad, I think will give you a different outcome. It's like when I get asked, did I do a good service or not, I usually give people the 5, the best. But, it's just the number. So, again, I think we got to come back and look at that data, kick it around, try to figure out another way to look at the data. And finally, in terms of the, we're looking at academics here, other things that will make you successful in life. I would say we have to come back and look at the veterans as a holistic, psychological, family, career, everything to make sure that we get these men and women that gave so much for our country, that they're actually on the right path to be successful citizens. I would say I got 30 seconds if you'd like to comment.
I think that assessing effectiveness after the service member has already left the service is a challenge. We do have existing surveys and research studies that we use. We annually survey through a status of forces survey both active and reserve component members about their perceptions of TAP, their needs within TAP. We also have recently commissioned a RAND study on the needs assessment of reserve component member transitions. We're looking forward to the results of that to help us inform our program to deliver in the most efficient and effective manner these services to them. So I think assessments, surveys, research studies are helpful to us. Getting to service members after they've transitioned to get that feedback is perhaps a challenge.
Mr. Chair, before I give up my time here, just want to say it's good you're doing the RAND studies. I'd rather you invest that money not only in the RAND studies, but going out to ask the veterans directly what is it that they need. Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel. Mr. Lyons, if you could, one of the most common complaints the subcommittee receives from service members about TAP is their local commanders and senior non-commissioned officers are somewhat less enthusiastic than they would hope in allowing them and working toward them attending the classes. If that's true, what portion of that do you think might be related to the fact that these senior members don't believe TAPS is providing what they really should provide, and it's not, quote, worth the time?
Thank you, Congressman. I would offer that in terms of service members and their commander support for them to attend TAP, I acknowledge the discussions that GAO had at the various post-Campson stations that they visited where that was relayed, and we are taking that on board. We want to explore and remove, if there are barriers to a service member attending TAP, we want to remove those barriers. We have very clear and effective policy to the services on implementing TAP and the importance of TAP, and continuing to reinforce as commanders go through their life cycle of professional military education, of reinforcing that message with them about the importance of TAP. It's interesting to note in our last participant assessment that 88% of our service members that participated in TAP reported that their leaders, their most immediate leaders, were supportive of their transition to civilian life, and that 88% of them reported that the leaders provided them time to attend and participate in TAP.
Exactly, which is why they were there.
Correct.
And why they were counted in your numbers.
Right.
But it makes me then beg the question, why do you believe that missing data shouldn't be taken into account when assessing TAP performance? Because those folks aren't there for some reason, and don't you think we should get to the bottom of that?
Congressman, we do feel that it's important as we assess data that it's based on known and complete data. So we view that in the old legacy system that we had as a completed paper form for completion of TAP. And we can assess then whether that service member has met the requirements and is career ready. With the deployment of our electronic form and our TAP IT enterprise, we think that we have significantly improved our capability to collect that data and assess those data points. We're going to continue to pursue removal of any barriers to attendance at TAP and increase the perception of the value of TAP. And we're going to work with our service partners.
That's what I'm looking
that.
for. And Ms. Devlin, isn't there an effort underway now to go back and talk to some of those individuals that did not attend and find out why?
We are actually in the process of creating a post-transition survey that will go out to service members who became veterans at the 6-month, 12-month, and 18-month point post-discharge. That'll give us an opportunity to ask them, did you attend TAP? If so, now that you're actually a civilian and you're a veteran, do you feel now that you know what you didn't know back then, that it met your needs? And if not, how could we improve it?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. At this point, we'd like to thank each of you for being here today and answering our questions. You're now excused. Our second and final panel will include General Robert Bennett, the Adjutant General of the United States Army, Admiral Carl Thomas, Director of the 21st Century Sailor Office of the Chief of Naval Operations for the United States Navy, General Kathleen Cook, Director of Air Force Services Manpower, Personnel, and Services for the United States Air Force, and General Kurt Stein, Director of Marine and Family Programs for the United States Marine Corps. Thank you to each of you for being here today. We will give you a moment to get seated before we will start. With that, General Bennett, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Representative O'Rourke, members of the committee, I would like to express my appreciation for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the Army's Soldier for Life Transition Assistant Program, or SFL TAP. SFL TAP is first and foremost a commander's program. SFL TAP mandates several courses based on the VOW Act and also includes other required courses or career readiness standards, or CRS, that helps prepare soldiers for their transition from active duty. In fall of 2017, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, provided a draft review of the transitioning veterans, DoD needs to improve performance reporting and monitoring for the Transition Assistance Program. Army concurs with all 6 recommendations found in the draft report. While the Army is proud of being a part of the myriad of major enhancements to TAP since the passing of the VOW Act, along with our DoD sister service and interagency partners, the Army believes that there is one important area in which TAP could and should continue to evolve. The Army would appreciate the ability to receive key post-transition outcome data from our interagency partners, which is vital to the future improvements. The Army strongly feels that receiving feedback from our interagency partners on both the type of assistance provided as well as the outcome and results of such assistance is critical to our ability to accurately gauge and assess the overall long-term efficiency of our efforts. The Army will closely collaborate with our partners on developing a strategy to enable us to receive this key data in the future. In addition to DoD TAP's reporting system, the Army uses a TAP 21, which is the key Army system of record, in order to provide commanders at this lowest level information and reports to fulfill their responsibilities under SFL TAP policy and law. TAP 21 reporting consolidates key transition data from several Army HR systems of record, which allows company commanders to correctly identify soldiers required to complete the TAP curriculum. These reports help ensure the soldier is career-ready and prepared for the civilian transition. The Army closed out fiscal year 2016 with the lowest amount of unemployment compensation for ex-service members in 13 years, $172.8 million, according to the Department of Labor. Soldier for Life TAP has several initiatives to further support soldiers in their transition, including a transition pilot program to evaluate tailored transition assistance for the soldiers, the Career Skills Program, which offers soldiers the opportunity to participate in the employment skills training, and the Virtual Center, which is the only virtual online platform to complete transition services. To conclude, I thank you for your continued support. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Admiral Thomas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to update you on the Navy's Transition Assistance Program. As the Director of the Navy's 21st Century Sailor Office, I'm responsible for sailor and family support and resilience programs. The Navy concurs with the recommendations of the General Accountability Office report on transitioning veterans. The Navy testified in 2015 that we were developing a transition information system to give commanders better visibility into compliance. We now have that system in place and have seen significant improvement in our metrics. We've put many other process improvements in place to include unit-level compliance reports, linking transition compliance to our prestigious Golden Anchor Retention Award, adding transition compliance to our Navy Inspector General checklist, and our Chief of Naval Operations Tone of the Force report. Our network of Navy career counselors continue to stress that transition should be planned throughout a sailor's career to ensure sailors document skills, certifications, and qualifications, and thus commence preparation early for their eventual transition. We remain committed to providing in-person, instructor-led training as the primary means of delivery, and are working to drive earlier completion of transition requirements. We also have an ongoing Naval Audit Service study to assist us in our compliance efforts. Beyond preparing our sailors for employment and advising them on the veteran benefits that they have earned, we recognize the importance of returning sailors to society so they continue to serve our country as solid, productive citizens who are examples and recruiters for our all-volunteer force. We recognize there is more to be done and look forward to participating in further refining the transition process in cooperation with Congress and this committee in particular, as well as our DoD and interagency partners. Our sailors deserve our steadfast commitment to provide them the most effective tools to position them for long-term success as they transition to serve our nation as honored and distinguished veterans. It is vital to the all-volunteer force that our successful veterans encourage the youth of our nation to serve in our nation's armed forces. On behalf of the Chief of Naval Operations, I thank you for your unwavering support for the men and the women of the United States Navy, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. General Cook, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today regarding the transition assistance our Air Force provides to our total force airmen and their families. Before I begin, let me state up front, I fully acknowledge our VAL compliance is not 100%, and there is more work to be done, refining our processes to ensure not only by-law compliance, but a strong continuum of care, especially within our Guard and Reserve components. We recognize how critically important being prepared to successfully transition out of the military is to the welfare of our airmen and their families. From senior Air Force leadership to our installation commanders, supervisors, and transition experts, we remain resolute in executing requirements of the VOW Act. What I'd like you to take away from my testimony today is twofold. First, we value our collaborative partnerships with the Departments of Defense, our sister services, Veterans Affairs, Labor and Education, and the Small Business Administration. Recognizing that successfully transitioning service members requires the support and information of the collective. Second, my goal is to leave you with confidence in our commitment to generate a cultural shift to viewing transition preparation as a military life cycle experience. It's important to note unique service characteristics that influence the development of our airmen and affect transition readiness. Based on our mission requirements, our airmen have more technical skills. 52% of our NCOs and 92% of our senior NCOs have at least an associate's degree. We're the only service with a technical associate degree program, our Community College of the Air Force, which translates education, training, and experience into accredited college credits. Since 1972, nearly 500,000 degrees have been awarded. In FY17 alone, the Community College of the Air Force awarded over 2 million semester hours of collegiate credit to over 268,000 students. The Air Force Military Tuition Assistance Program totaled $154 million, and our Air Force Certification Program provided 397 unique and transferable certifications for career fields such as cyber systems operations and civil engineering. I reference this to illustrate that our airmen, generally speaking, have the opportunity to get a jump start on transition. That said, deliberately embracing a culture of transition readiness throughout the military life cycle is consistent with and would strengthen our wingman culture. As we work to implement 2017 GAO recommendations, we're currently performing comprehensive upgrades to our TAP processes based on our challenges with VAL compliance. From providing exception to policy so our Guard and Reserve members complete pre-separation counseling only once every 5 years or attend VA briefings once every 3 years if activated under the same authority, to annual training sessions for all readiness NCOs, to working with DMDC to validate eligibility data and database accuracy, and seeking IT solutions to add a flag notification to the system, all the way to changing out processing checklists, messaging our active duty and Guard Reserve Force Support Squadrons, briefing commanders, first sergeants, and chiefs at our professional military education and leadership courses, and mandating Airmen and Family Readiness Center directors brief incoming commanders on VAL compliance within 30 days. We're even adding text to Airmen monthly leave and earning pay statements to highlight TAP requirements. Our total force commanders are inspected for compliance, and we've updated our Air Force instruction to stress commander responsibility and accountability. And specifically to the reserve component, should all this still result in someone missing the opportunity to complete TAP, Air Force Reserve Command is tracking every member and will bring them back on active status to complete the process. Across the board, we're focused on attaining 100% compliance. I just highlighted what we're doing today to fine-tune the current process, but I'm even more optimistic about the future, given the synergy available to us when we proactively align our TAP military lifecycle touchpoints with our blended retirement financial literacy training touchpoints. Much like an individual development plan, financial planning requires continual evaluation. Merging the two programs' touchpoint requirements over the course of one's career, however long or short, allows the member to take full advantage of the capabilities provided. General Goldfein, our Chief of Staff, is keenly focused on revitalizing squadrons. He believes squadrons are the heartbeat of the Air Force, and we succeed or fail in our mission based on that squadron experience. Translated, the well-being, resiliency, and readiness of our airmen and their families is directly tied to the squadron and its leadership. Successfully transitioning our airmen also depends on the informed and engaged leadership. In my opinion, there are two overarching components to improving VAL compliance. First, ensuring all airmen are fully educated on the requirement for TAP, and second, ensuring commanders understand their critical role and that they are held accountable for their airmen being transition ready. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And finally, General Stein, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's my privilege to appear before you today to discuss the transition readiness of your Marines. Marines are the foundation of our Corps. They are our Corps' most critical resource, and they always will be. Most of your Marines, by design, are young fighters who plan to separate after 1 or 2 tours. Everything we do in the Marine Corps must contribute to their readiness, including the transition readiness. To this end, our transition readiness program begins very early in a Marine's career. Our framework, the Marine for Life cycle, includes several major action points beginning right after boot camp and completing within months before separation with the capstone event. In this way, our Marines are learning and thinking early and often about their eventual transition to civilian life. Our transition readiness program has evolved significantly over time, and we continuously seek ways to improve it. We recently implemented the DoD TAP E-Form Enterprise database and believe that it will help us better capture and manage our transition data and increase compliance. We're also incorporating transition readiness into our Inspector General evaluation programs, which we believe will help increase timeliness. The draft GOE report identified some gaps in our current program, especially in regard to VAL compliance and timeliness, and particularly within the reserves. We appreciate their findings and recommendations and believe they will help us further improve our programs. An overarching theme for the Marine Corps as an institution has always been that we make Marines, we win battles, and we return those Marines back to civilian capacity as better citizens. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you to each of you. With that, I will reserve the 5 minutes of time, if I can, for the chairman when he returns, and will yield to my friend and Ranking Member O'Rourke for his 5 minutes.
Thank you. I will start with General Bennett, trying to figure out the best way to phrase this question, but trying to get from fulfilling a PE credit before you graduate or checking a box, or I've heard the phrase compliance come up very often, to getting to the spirit of the VOW Act and what we want to do for those transitioning service members. And I wonder if the onus is not on us in Congress to improve that legislation to explicitly define success measurements that we have been looking for on this committee. If you are fulfilling the requirement to get that soldier in the seat, and hopefully to do a better job of having that happen before they hit the 90-day mark, and perhaps encouraging more of them to take the 2-day supplemental course so that they're better prepared for that transition, you may have fulfilled the requirements of the VOW Act, and you are in compliance. I don't know if this is for me to ask you and for you to answer, but can you suggest ways that we can improve the legislation to get at what hopefully we've been able to articulate in terms of measurable outcomes that show us whether or not this is of value beyond the compliance?
Yes, sir. We invest, the Army, vast amounts of resources, $80 million a year to take care of our soldiers. And my personal goal is I do not want to have a warm handover to Department of Labor or VA. I want to take care of the Army family here within the Army. And I agree in the discussion earlier, we discussed about outputs as it relates to career readiness standards. We're doing pretty good in outputs in measuring, did they get the job done? Yes, we need to work on timeliness. And that's the next stage of getting after ensuring the soldiers are properly taken care of at the appropriate time. But the outcomes, did they get a job? That's where we do need some help. Because I see them from the time they receive a 214, but I don't know what happens after that soldier departs my organization. And I need to know, the Army needs to know, so that then I can, if need be, with that feedback, I could adjust my program so that it's a better program for the soldiers that are following those after their departure, so we can get it right. So where I could use some help from the Army is a warm handover follow-up from the Department of Labor and VA, data from the Department of Labor and VA on success of transitioning soldiers after they leave Soldier for Life TAP, and then the flexibility to tailor Soldier for Life TAP to the needs of the individual soldier, i.e. a 20-year soldier who's getting ready to retire. Probably you want to tailor the program differently from someone who is in the service for 4 years and getting ready to depart. It's usually an 18 to 24-year-old. Some of them are probably high risk when it means to unemployment.
Yeah.
From the Army perspective, that was where I would ask for your help.
Yeah, and I really like the way General Denton on the previous panel put it in terms of one of the goals being to see military service as the best possible path to a high-quality career afterwards. If that's the goal, which I can't argue with, we need to measure that. So how much are you earning? How fulfilled are you in the work or career that you have following military service? Got to be a way to do that. But again, maybe that's on us to legislate that, require that, not on you to add more compliance measures that Congress hasn't mandated. Mr. Chairman, I see some of our friends in the audience who've been here for conversations about the post 9/11 GI Bill, and I feel like we've had a very similar conversation where we're measuring seats in chairs, in attendance and graduation, but not the success that those veterans have in their careers or in their life. And that really has to be, I think, the measure that we're able to describe and define. And then I think everyone's going to see more value in the program. Those commanders right now who are grudgingly allowing their service members to attend the classes or trying to get them out of it by asking for an online course, we're going to see more service members availing themselves of the 2-day supplemental course. We're going to be better stewards of the taxpayer dollar. I wonder if this committee can't work on, just a thought, what some of those additional measures are and maybe amend the legislation to include those going forward and give these service branches something to perform to. So that's just a suggestion to work on going forward, and I'll yield back to you. Thank you for your answers, General Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and I agree with you. I think if I may yield myself 5 minutes, and I apologize for having to step out, and I won't take all 5 minutes, Mr. Rutherford. I'll option the ball to you here, but to me, that's the heart of my concerns and the crux of the matter on programs like this and any other program that philosophically and in theory is an excellent objective, but in practice, we don't know if it's working, and we don't know how to make the changes to make it better until we are constantly measuring not just the input or output, but outcomes. So, really, that's about the sum of my thoughts and comments, and I agree with the ranking member. I heard a couple of the panelists prior to you guys talk about doing a survey or trying to come up with some instrument to do what we're talking about. I think we need to get a group together, and it should be driven by the stakeholders. You guys ought to know what your customers need, want, and what are the right questions to get at whether this is working. And we ought to have you guys present that to us. We can be involved in some way. We ought to do it in short order, because I understood a couple of the folks, I can't remember who it was, were already working on this. The other thing that concerns me is when you have too many agencies, too many hands involved, I worry that it gets convoluted and more complicated, and if too many people are responsible, nobody's responsible, sort of thing. So, and I recognize you have different agency jurisdiction and all that, but if there was a way to consolidate the contract, for example, or I don't know the answer, but I'd like your feedback on having too many cooks in the kitchen on this and that making things more complicated. And then the other piece is just making sure it's a priority at DOD, because it does not sound like it's a priority when they're not measuring. This was a point the ranking member made on the last panel. If you're not measuring outcomes, and if you're not actually making sure that everybody's complying with that 90-day, prior to the 90-day law, then that just tells me that something's broken at DOD in terms of ensuring it's being done. And is this a priority in the Department of Defense? Do you think it is? I know you guys are responsible within the bureaucracy of the Pentagon. Tell me, do you think it's a priority? Do you think that DOD believes it's a priority? I'll just go down the line. I mean, do you really think it's a priority for them?
Sir, absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree in that we teach this, we preach this at the First Sergeant course, the Commander's course, at the pre-command course for our battalion and brigade commanders. It is a requirement, and it's funny that you mentioned about consolidating, contracts. We're looking at that in the Army right now. I have 7 different contracts within my TAP. I'm trying to have one belly button, and that's what we're working on right now.
That's it.
And we're trying to get there, and we're actually in our 3rd meeting right now. But, sir, totally agree with you, and I know dealing with the Governor's Committee, they're on board as well, but this will help in getting one step further where we need to be.
Thank you. Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would also agree that it is a priority in the Navy. We have really taken on board the military life cycle concept where we bring in the concept of transitioning early on in the career development boards. We train up our career counselors so that they can start talking and preparing our sailors early. And we've really taken on board the idea of getting credentialing and trying to give sailors items that will translate to the civil sector. I like Representative Rutherford's comments that the measure of, having that letter that says you're accepted to a college, that's fairly easy, and I've seen it myself when I've been in command. The job one is a little bit more challenging, and ensuring that person has that job offer before they leave. But if we could get to that point, that's a great measure of success.
Let me just assume everybody thinks it's a good deal. Let's demonstrate that you believe that to the taxpayers who are paying $500 million for these programs because they love their men and women in service and our veterans, as you do as well, and I know you do. Let's demonstrate it by coming back with with a plan to consolidate things for accountability and clarity in terms of roles and make it less complicated and convoluted. Let's come back with a plan on how to measure the outcomes, and let's apply that across the board, and let's find out if it's working and how we need to improve it, because everybody fundamentally knows this is a good thing. And so let's put our money where our mouth is, and let's go invest the time and resources to get this thing done. You guys can tell us, and I don't want to pass a law if we don't have to pass a law. Sometimes, my first bill made it through the House floor, and I was honored to do this legislative reform with my colleague from Texas and friend. But I have to say, moving this home adaptation for disabled veterans from one part of the VA bureaucracy to another, where they actually have the core competency where this group didn't. It's actually called specially adapted housing over here. Over here, it's about vocational rehab. And I'm having to tell my newspaper, look, I'm just going to be honest with you, this should be done without Congress having to act. Will it help the veteran? Yes. Will it help the disabled community? Yes. Will it save taxpayer money? I believe it will. But my goodness, please help us help our veterans and come up with these ideas and make presentations. And then if you need the law to change, I guarantee you'll have the support of this committee. I've gone way over my time. Mr. Takano, I yield the balance of my 10 minutes that I took. I recognize you for...
Oh, now you're overstating things here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say that I was very pleased to hear from the Office of the Undersecretary, the Director, Mr. Lyons, indicate that the military was interested in engaging with the service member much earlier in the service member's life cycle. But my sense was that even though the military is engaging the service members in establishing career and educational goals early and counseling, that there really wasn't assessment happening and determining whether that service member had all the skills and knowledge or whether there was any need to remediate their skills so that service members are ready before they leave. So let me just state what I believe simply ought to be happening. What ought to be happening is that on day one in their induction in the military, there should be an assessment of the service member and a determination initially of what their goals are career-wise and education-wise, knowing that that 18-year-old is not necessarily going to exactly know who they are at that moment, and we could expect those goals to change. But we should at least know whether or not that service member needs to be doing some work to improve their math skills, their communication skills, their English skills. And I believe the military should be holding them accountable for that because they were recruited on the basis of GI Bill benefits. And the taxpayer has an interest in making sure that those benefits aren't wasted, that they're not squandered, that they're not put into debt after they spend down those benefits and so forth and so on. I would like to see also, is there a sense, given that context what I've laid out to you, I believe it's in the best interest of our country that we see a strategic use of tuition assistance while they are in the military for those young people to be acquiring whatever remediation they need and or gaining course credit so that they can transfer into a degree program rather seamlessly. Can you give me some background idea of how well you think tuition assistance is being used in each branch, each of the branches of the military? How well how well spent is that tuition assistance money, and how well do you help our service members use that opportunity?
Tuition assistance is one of the many areas that I do own, and it is quite popular with the senior leaders of the Army, and we're finding many different ways of getting after ensuring from a strategic message that...
you said the senior leaders of the
of the Army, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I mean, this has special attention of the Sergeant Major of the Army, who is getting after tuition assistance and getting after credentialing with these soldiers, the career skills program. All this is encompassing under maybe not the tuition assistance pot of money, but we're getting after ensuring that you're correct, sir, way before the transitioning process starts from the active Army, that they're educated and they're prepared for the civilian sector. So it is quite popular, and I'm actually going for the POM cycle requesting for additional money for next year, and it's getting bigger and better and growing steam as it relates to the soldiers acquiring tuition assistance. And
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else care to comment?
Yes, sir. We had 46,000 sailors in 2016 use the tuition assistance program and take over 131,000 classes, and we bring instructors out to our ships so they can take them even when they're deployed. So it's a very popular program and utilized by many of our sailors.
And is it used by not just the senior
It's
officers?
actually tends to be used more by the junior people.
More used by junior, yes. Great, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Sir, thank you. I'd like to also mention that, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, tuition assistance for the Air Force is extremely important. In FY17, we expended $154 million in tuition assistance, leading to the percentages of 52% of our NCOs and 92% of our senior NCOs obtaining at least a 2-year degree. So we begin to discuss this path forward with our young enlisted at about the 4 to 6 to 8 year mark after they finish their technical skill training. So from day one, we are having a conversation with them. And if I could, I'd also like to address your earlier question about assessing individuals.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, sir. So for the Air Force specifically, and I know for the other services, there's an entry exam that indicates where they are successful, efficient, and then deficient as well. So the initial exam we take a look at, and then it is followed through with our basic training. We have constant assessment through basic training, followed through our technical skills, and all along the way, if there's remedial work required, we will ensure that they reach that. And then after all of the technical training, once they get to their first base location in our what we call first-term airmen's program, we also have conversations about the financial, educational programs available to them. So we get them from the very beginning and consistently through. And in my opening remarks, as I mentioned, with the military life cycle of combining the touch points for our financial literacy as well as our TAP programs, this creates touch points consistently throughout in the high points of an airman's career change, promotion, family, childbirth, et cetera. So we absolutely believe that education is important, and we are hitting it from beginning to end.
Might I continue with a question, Mr. Chairman? So you're talking about from the lowest rank of airmen all the way up, this is what you apply as the assessments.
Yes, sir. So for our enlisted, they will come in and they get their test at the beginning and they go to technical school. And then we push them toward our community college of the Air Force, beginning about their 4-year mark. For our officers, obviously, they come in with a degree in order to become an officer. So they're already assessed at a certain level. And then what I'd also like to offer is even in our feedbacks, which happen when you report to a unit, that first feedback, the initial, we discuss the financial and educational assessments. Then, 6 months later, it's in our feedback, and in our annual assessment, we also have those conversations for both enlisted and officer.
Mr. Chairman, could the Marines answer the same question?
Yes, Congressman. We have the same model that the Air Force has, specifically as far as assessing the individual Marine prior to assessing the tuition assistance program. Our TA program is really focused and geared towards the junior enlisted Marines with a high school diploma, basically. And when they, prior to being given the tuition assistance dollars, they take an assessment, a test, to identify any deficiencies academically in any certain vertical of academia, whether it's mathematics or whatever, and then they are given remedial education in that space prior to going on and spending taxpayer dollars, Marine Corps dollars for tuition assistance for undergraduate credits under a credentialed institution.
Well, I certainly learned something new, and I want to know more about what you're doing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. Mr. Rutherford, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for your lengthy testimony and for your service to our country. You know, there's an old adage, don't beat a dead horse, but after we say that, we always beat a dead horse. So that's what I want to do very briefly, so I will keep this short. There was something very interesting that General Stein and General Bennett mentioned. General Bennett, you talked about TAP 21 and how in that follow-up, one of the matrices that you actually looked at was low unemployment payouts. I thought that's incredible. It makes me beg the question, what other matrices do you have that you're looking at? And then General Stein mentioned that they have similar assessments with the Air Force, and makes me wonder, do you also have similar outcome matrices for all 4 services? General?
So yes, as I alluded to earlier, what would be, we do measure, and I know unemployment compensation will change every year, but that is one of our biggest measurement that we use right now. And again, we're below the 200 million mark, first time in 13 years, 172.8, and and you will see.
That's excellent. Yeah.
Yes, sir. And you will see that this year, once the report comes out, I think we do even better. At the end of third quarter, FY17, we're at 101 million. So I think we're on the mark. What I'm finding out within the reserve component, if we want to delineate between the components, reserve, when I say reserve, that's National Guard and the Army Reserve, at 12%. 12% is the unemployment compensation rate. And for regular Army active duty, 34%.
Very good.
So we're on the road to improvement, but again, where I could use the help of, as you allude to, sir, on measurements, that is, once a soldier departs the active duty, the outcome piece, did they get a job? That's what I need to know to better piece. Is my program doing what it's supposed to do? Thank you.
And so the other branches, can you comment? Do you have such a matrices as that or no?
Sir, the Navy does have the unemployment numbers as well, and we're down at the lowest that we've been since 2011. We're at 67 million, so the right trajectory.
Very good.
So I'm certain the Air Force does have the numbers, but I don't have them with me, so I would be happy to get those back to you.
General?
Yes, sir. We know that our trend line is decreasing in the unemployment numbers. I don't have the specific data, though, for me, but I can get back to you on that.
What other matrices do you have on the outcomes besides unemployment? Is there actually a list? Does anybody share outcomes or? criteria
Well, sir,
that you're looking at?
Admiral Thomas and I, being with the Department of the Navy, there's a lot of programs that he and I work together on, suicide prevention, sexual assault, behavioral health issues, things like that. So being able to track them and finding metrics is kind of difficult. So in this scenario, a measurement of performance would be how many people do we get into the classroom for the Transition Readiness Seminar and complete the capstone event with a counselor. But the measurement of effectiveness is the second part of the story,
Right.
that once they separate from the service, we really don't have situational awareness on them. Even their willingness to sign up with the VA during separation is optional.
Yeah.
So it's a tough landscape to be able to actually get measurements of effectiveness on, well, how did that translate into how well you did academically, how well you did as a young entrepreneur in that space. The Boots to Business program, for example. We do know there are certain programs that we have, like the Skill Bridge program, which is a great news story for all of the services, where there's one partner that we work with that has a 94% placement after they're done with the program.
Right.
And they still do that while they're on active duty. And that's a command, the commanders allow them to participate in that program without negatively affecting the operational readiness of the unit.
Right. We have a community-based program in Northeast Florida, Operation New Uniform, which we're now going to try to replicate across the country, which has a tremendous placement rate after graduation from their program. And so I thank all of you, and I think, Mr. Chairman, that may be an area that we could actually assist through some of the interagency relationships to try to get some of that information available for you for those evaluations of effectiveness, which we currently lack. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford, and we'll just conclude with one question for each service represented on the panel. Sir, what would the one thing you would do if you were king of this program and in control of the program from start to finish? What's the one thing you would do to make it work better for our veterans?
And we alluded to this many times, sir. Mr. Rutherford, you just talked about it, the outcome piece.
Okay.
Once they depart.
Okay. Sir?
I would agree, and I think that we're doing a great job of bringing folks hiring fairs, bringing those outreach. There's a sea of goodwill out there that people want to help us, and getting them to the bases to have those fairs be fruitful and getting the word out. I think the American public wants to hire veterans, which is a good thing. The landscape is rich, and we just got to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think the question is, I agree, I think people want to hire veterans. The question is, how does this program help them achieve that? Because if you've got the demand side, and as we supply the material of folks transitioning from active to civilian, are we better preparing them to make that a higher achievement, a higher rate of achievement? I'll just keep going. One thing.
I believe continued partnership with the interagencies as we try to more accurately define, for example, certifications. And Department of Labor is doing some excellent work in defining for us what are the key certifications that a member would need to get a job in cyber or get a job in civil engineering, because there are so many certifications out there. So we find great value in the partnerships with our interagencies.
Sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I concur with my fellow panel members here. I think it's connecting the dots and having the conduit with the audience. The demand signal's there. They want to hire veterans. A lot of times they don't know what door to open up. They don't know how to access and the process and the line of effort, if you will, to make that happen and make it a more mature program, if you will, as connecting the dots with the interagency, with the VSOs, with all the partnerships and for example, the Marine Corps League, in my case, the VFW, the Chamber of Commerce, all those entities that are out there. The demand signal's high. They want to help. It's just a matter of us cracking the code on how to allow those conduits to open up.
Thank you guys for your time. Thank you for your service to our country and for your help in this process to improve this important program. What I'd like to do, Mr. Rutherford, is ask in relatively short order, Ms. Devlin, are you still here? I'd like Ms. Devlin from the VA, and I know there are lots of components to this, but to get the stakeholders together from that interagency working group, but I mean somebody from VA, somebody from labor, somebody from DOD, and I want these folks here on the panel that are front line with this program and the customers of the program to be a part of that. And I'd like for you guys to come back by the end of the year and define what success is. That is, what are the desired outcomes? Real clear. What are the success metrics? How do we measure that we're achieving those desired outcomes? And then lastly, any other recommendations for operational efficiency, like Mr. Bennett said about consolidating 7 contracts into one. Other ways, recommendations to make this program run more effectively, efficiently, and with greater accountability. That is, for the next close to 60 days, the charge that I give you on behalf of this committee, because I think you guys have the answers. And then if we can help through law writing, we will do that. If we don't need that, then let's just fix the problem and do right by our veterans and our taxpayers. God bless you guys. Now I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered. We're adjourned.